There is one rule that almost no one argues about. Not believers. Not skeptics. Not scientists. Not philosophers. It's the rule that silently governs every argument, every debate, every disagreement, especially arguments against God. You might deny God exists. You might deny meaning. You might deny purpose. But there is one thing you do not deny. You cannot deny it. Because the moment you try to deny it, you are already using it. This rule is so basic that we rarely notice it. So obvious that it feels invisible. So foundational that without it, no sentence, including this one, could even make sense. It is not a religious doctrine. It is not a theological claim. It is not written in any holy book. And yet, without it, atheism itself collapses before it can even begin. Tonight, we are not going to argue for God. We are not going to quote scripture. We are not going to appeal to revelation. Instead, we are going to ask a quieter, more unsettling question. What kind of universe must exist for logic itself to make sense? And more specifically, does the logical law atheists rely on fit inside a godless universe at all? Part 1. The atheist commitment to logic. One of the most common stereotypes about atheists is that they reject faith in favor of reason. And in many ways, that's fair. Modern atheism, especially in its scientific and philosophical forms, places enormous emphasis on logic, evidence, consistency, and rational argument. Atheists often say things like, "Show me the evidence. That argument doesn't follow. You're contradicting yourself. That belief isn't logically coherent." These are not insults. They are appeals to logic. And importantly, these appeals are not optional. An atheist cannot say, "Logic doesn't matter to me." Because the moment they do, no argument against God, or anything else, can even be made. Atheism is not a shrug. It is a claim. And claims require reasons. Reasons require arguments. Arguments require logic. So atheism is not hostile to logic. It is dependent on it. In fact, many atheists are more committed to logic than religious believers. They insist that beliefs must be internally consistent, free from contradiction, rationally justified. This commitment is admirable. But it raises an important question, one that is rarely asked. What exactly is logic, and why should it bind us? Part 2. The law we all use. Among the laws of logic, one stands above the rest. It is so basic that it feels almost silly to name it. And yet, it is the foundation of every meaningful statement ever made. It is called the law of non-contradiction. In its simplest form, it says, a statement cannot be both true and false at the same time. In the same way, something cannot both exist and not exist simultaneously. A proposition cannot both hold and not hold under the same conditions. This law is not controversial. If someone says, God exists and God does not exist in the same sense at the same time, we do not say, interesting perspective. We say, that makes no sense. And we are right to say that. The law of non-contradiction is not a cultural preference. It is not a linguistic convention. It is not a rule we voted on. It is something we assume before we can even begin to reason. Every atheist argument against God assumes it. Every scientific paper presupposes it. Every denial of religion relies on it. Without this law, evidence cannot support conclusions. Arguments cannot refute claims. Truth and falsehood collapse into confusion. So the law of non-contradiction is not optional. It is binding. But now comes the question that almost never gets asked. What kind of thing is this law? Part 3. What kind of thing is a logical law? This is where things get interesting. Because logical laws are strange. They do not behave like physical objects. You cannot see the law of non-contradiction. You cannot weigh it. You cannot locate it in space. It has no temperature, no mass, no chemical composition. And yet, it is not imaginary. We do not treat logic like a fairy tale. If someone violates logic, we do not say, that's just your truth. We say, that's wrong. Logical laws are not descriptive in the way physics is. Physics describes how matter behaves. Logic tells us how thought must behave to be rational. And that must is crucial. Logic is normative. It does not merely describe how humans happen to think. It tells us how we ought to think. If someone reasons inconsistently, we do not say, "That's just how their brain evolved." We say, "They made a mistake." But mistakes imply standards. And standards imply something more than matter and motion. So let's ask some honest questions. Is the law of non-contradiction a physical law? A product of evolution? A social convention? A human invention? Let's take these one by one. Part 4. Is logic a physical law? Physical laws describe how particles behave. Gravity, electromagnetism, nuclear forces. They operate within space and time. But logical laws do not behave that way. The law of non-contradiction was true before humans existed, before brains evolved, before language emerged. If there were no minds at all, contradictions would still be impossible. The statement, "The universe both exists and does not exist in the same way," would still be incoherent, even if no one were around to notice. Logical laws do not depend on matter. Matter depends on logical coherence to be intelligible at all. So logic is not a physical law. Part 5. Is logic a product of evolution? This is a common move. Some atheists say, logic evolved because it helped us survive. But notice what this explanation does, and does not, give us. Evolution explains why certain patterns of thinking might be useful. It does not explain why they are true. Evolution selects for survival, not truth. False beliefs can be adaptive. True beliefs can be dangerous. If logic is merely a byproduct of survival pressures, then it loses its normative force. At best, logic becomes the way our species happens to think. But then we lose the right to say, "You ought to reason logically." Because ought cannot be derived from evolved. Evolution gives us habits, not obligations. And more importantly, if logic evolved, it could have evolved differently. But logical laws are not contingent. We do not imagine a universe where contradictions are sometimes okay. A universe where 2 + 2 = 4 and not 4 at the same time is not a strange universe. It is not a different universe. It is not a universe at all. So logic does not look evolved. It looks necessary. Part 6. Is logic a human convention? Another proposal is that logic is a social agreement. A rule we made up to communicate effectively. But this explanation collapses almost immediately. If logic is a convention, then someone could opt out. They could say, "I don't accept the law of non-contradiction." And we would have no rational grounds to object. But we do object. Not emotionally. Logically. We say, "Your rejection refutes itself." Because to reject logic, one must use logic. Even the claim, "Logic is a convention," must obey logical rules to mean anything. Conventions can be changed. Logic cannot. That is why logic binds even those who deny it. So logic is not a social invention. Part 7. The strange status of logical laws. At this point, we are left with something very peculiar. Logical laws are not physical, not biological, not cultural, not invented, not optional, not contingent. They are universal, necessary, immaterial, normative, and they apply to all rational minds, human or otherwise. This is not a theological conclusion. This is simply an observation. Logic behaves like something that exists beyond the material world. And now the tension begins to surface. Part 8. The Godless Universe Problem. A godless universe, as usually understood, consists of matter, energy, space, time, chance, blind physical laws. There is no intrinsic purpose, no inherent meaning, no cosmic mind. Everything that exists is either physical or reducible to the physical. But logic does not fit comfortably here. Because logic is not something matter does. It is something minds ought to follow. So why should a mindless universe care about consistency? Why should atoms arranged one way be wrong if arranged inconsistently? Wrongness is not a physical property. Contradiction does not emit radiation. Incoherence does not weigh anything. So where does the authority of logic come from? Why are we obligated to obey it? Part 9. Brute facts and silent assumptions. At this point, many atheists say, logic just is. It's a brute fact. No explanation required. But notice the cost of this move. Logic becomes unexplained, uncaused, necessary, universal, immaterial, which starts to sound suspiciously like the very thing atheism denies. We are not saying, therefore, God exists. We are asking something quieter. Why does a godless worldview keep needing things that look strangely God-like? Atheism does not derive logic. It assumes it. It borrows it. It relies on it, silently. Part 10. Theism and the fit of logic. In classical theism, logic is not arbitrary. It reflects the rational structure of reality itself. Not because God decided logic by fiat, but because reality is grounded in rationality. In this view, logical laws are expressions of necessary truth. Rational minds participate in that order. Logic is discoverable because reality is intelligible. This does not prove God, but it fits. The pieces align. Logic is not floating inexplicably in a void. It has a home. Part 11. Why this matters. This is not about winning debates. It is about intellectual honesty. If atheism relies on logic, and it does, then it owes an account of logic. Not a dismissal. Not a shrug. An explanation. And if that explanation quietly assumes features that atheism officially rejects, that tension deserves attention. Conclusion. The question that remains. The law of non-contradiction is not religious. But it is not neutral either. It demands a reality where reason matters. Where truth is not optional. Where coherence is binding. The question is not, do atheists use logic? They must. The real question is, what kind of universe makes logic unavoidable? And whether a godless universe can really carry the weight of the rule it cannot live without.